Hey y'all, I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate, and we're bringing you another episode of I'm Moving to North Carolina, Now What? So today's topic is going to be a little interesting because I'm going to talk about what annoys you. So here we go with the top 5 most annoying things when you list a home. So we're talking about the seller's side today. But before we move forward, remember to go ahead and like, share, and follow this video so that you're in the know for future content. So, the first thing that sellers typically get a little frustrated with are disclosures. So, every year in July, I know kind of random, but right there, smack dab in the middle of the year, we update all our contract paperwork. And one of the big ones that got a huge overhaul in the last couple of months was our disclosures. We refer to them as the R codes, they are the residential property owner disclosures, essentially. Those disclosures went from looking kind of like a high school thesis statement, if you remember in English class, where it was just all kind of together. It was not easy to fill out. And to be honest with you, wasn't super easy for buyers to really pick out the important pieces of information. But it was a 4-page document we had to include with all listings. Now it is a 6-page document. So we did increase the length, but in an effort to truncate the information. So now if you're like, I need to know about the HVAC system, there is actually an HVAC section that's going to take you through all of the history and the information for those systems in the home. There's a plumbing section, structural, etc. You can kind of see where I'm going with this. But I will say that for sellers, it's a little bit more taxing on your time to fill out. It really makes you think about the history of your home. Fortunately, it's a yes, no, or no representation, or in some cases, a not applicable answer. You don't have to overthink it. It's not meant to stress you out, but it is something that the seller needs to fill out on their own. It is not meant for the real estate agent to chime in and give their feedback because they are not the homeowner. The second one that can be most frustrating is you are going to get a lot of questions on things that you might see as super obvious. So, to give you a perfect example, we were just talking about the HVAC system. And so you might get a buyer that follows up and says, hey, do you know how old the HVAC system is? Well, in the disclosures, there is a line that literally says what year the HVAC system is. And we do see sometimes sellers might put unknown. Well, in that case, it would fall to the real estate agent to actually get some of the answers to these. But there can be a lot of back and forth, or they might be asking questions that just kind of seem either obvious to you or things that you in your head are like, man, that doesn't matter to me. But it could be something that's super important to the buyer. And it typically kind of revolves around like the minutia, the nuances of the home, or the history, because as you guys know, in North Carolina, it is an as-is purchase state. So while it's very easy to get frustrated with some of those buyer questions, you have to keep in mind that buyers have to ask all of this up front, in person, and really kind of front load those questions, because once they go under contract with you, their due diligence and potentially their earnest money is on the line, and it can be pretty sizable. So it's good to go ahead and tell them as much as you possibly can, while understanding that anything you share is a material fact. So just make sure that it is accurate. Another thing that can be a little tough is waiting for your first offer. I think coming out of the heels of the market that we had between 2020 and 2022, there is naturally this sense of, okay, we're going to immediately get into multiple offers in our first day or even 5 minutes. But things have cooled off a little bit, right? The housing market is going a little bit more back towards the norms that we would have had in 2019 and prior. So there is that rule of thumb that you kind of have to be a little bit patient. You also really need to be cognizant of feedback, showing traffic, how you priced and prepped the home. All of that kind of comes into the foot traffic and how quickly you get under contract. So just understand that sometimes there needs to be a little bit of a breathing room, and you definitely need to have those strategies in place and let the market do its job. The next one is due diligence negotiation. So ideally, when you're negotiating due diligence, there is this idea that you can have somebody being super irrational and somebody being very rational. Typically, both sides are trying to come from a place of comfort, right? So what each side deems as fair, and to be honest with you, nothing's ever going to be split down the middle, absolutely fair. Very rarely do we have that kind of thing happen. So when you get into these negotiations, that it's the back and forth constantly, it can be quite exhausting, but you want to make sure that you're asking for the evidence, you're getting those quotes, you're making sure that you validate where their information is coming from, and feel free to ask questions for clarity, because it does boil down to one thing, and that is money that is either being spent or saved on either side. Another one is showings. So, if a home is owner occupied, meaning that you are still living in the property, it can be a little daunting to have complete strangers walking through your home. You also need to keep in mind if you have anything that you deem is super private, everybody's allowed to open those closets and open those drawers and do all those things. So you might want to tuck those things in a space or lock them up somewhere where they're not easily accessible. So think about any type of private documents or things that are like, jewelry or stuff that's your kids. Also, a big one is if you are a weapon owner, I would highly recommend putting those in a safe place that are not going to be in a space where people are constantly walking through your property just for liability reasons. And then the last one, this is kind of a bonus one, but this does happen more often than people think, and that is the expectation that closing day is going to happen on closing day. Y'all, there are so many different things that can happen at the 11th hour. For example, the CD doesn't get to the buyer, and that 3-day window that is federal law, it can't be followed, right? So sometimes stuff gets bumped just because things play out that way. Or lo and behold, the day you're supposed to close, the HVAC freezes over and it needs to be repaired. And so that needs to be negotiated and decided. There are just a lot of things that can happen. So understand that while it is a contract term, closing date is what people consider a hard and fast rule of thumb. There are still things that can happen that can alter that. And that is why there's a clause in the contract that says that you have the option to push closing out by 7 days if needed. And that's for super reasons, right? These aren't just because I woke up today and I'm just not feeling it. I don't want to sign documents. That's not a legitimate reason. But if it's something like finances or something in the house changes and it's not in the same condition it was in when you went under contract, those are all things that can actually push that date. So, overall, guys, I use this phrase a lot. I would love to tell you that buying and selling a home is always going to be rainbows, puppies, and sunshine. But unfortunately, it is up there with death and taxes. It can be a little bit stressful, but that's why it is important for you to hire somebody who is going to be detail oriented, hands on, walk you through the process, and then they will at least alleviate a little bit of that stress that otherwise would be fully your burden. Again, I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate, and we will see you on our next episode.